To understand key signatures better, we have to take a moment and look back at scales. If we think about major scales and how they're constructed, there's a pattern of whole steps and half steps that produces a major scale. If I were to think of this, that's the result of me going whole step, half step, whole step, half step. Or another way to think of it, you could just think whole, half, whole, half. For anyone who's studied scales, this is going to be a review. Now, when we think about how scales work, we can start at the C major scale, which you may already know is the scale that's composed entirely of natural notes. No sharps or flats required. So we think C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and C. That's our C major scale. If we look at the tonic is C. If we look at the dominant, the fifth note of the scale, that's G, or in this case, do and so. If we build a scale on that G, and we follow the whole step and half step pattern, we would get all of those notes plus one sharp. In this case, it would be F sharp. That's the note that I have to change in order to produce a major scale pattern. Whole, half, whole, half. So this here is C major. This here is G major. And all I had to do was change one note. Here's C major. Here's G major. If I didn't change that note, it's close. It's almost the major scale, but it's off by just that one note. By changing that, I have a new major scale. I can then go one more, and I can start on the dominant of the G scale, the so, the fifth note of that scale, which is D. And if I produce the same patterns starting on D, I'll have two sharp notes, whole, and then in order to produce a whole there, I have to make an F sharp, half, whole, and in order to produce a whole note there, I have to add a C sharp there. So this is D major. And if I were to go to the fifth note of that scale, the dominant, so, which is A, then I would get that scale, and I would have to add three sharps. I would have to add whole and then whole step to add that. Half, whole, have to sharp that, whole, have to sharp that, whole, and then half. And this gives me the A major scale. Now, as I said, if you've studied scales already, this is review. But what you may not have noticed is that each time I go up to the dominant, each time I go up to the fifth note in the scale, and I build a new scale, I have to add one more sharp. Here, I had to add F sharp. And here, I kept the F sharp, but I also had to add C sharp. And here, I kept the F sharp, and I had to keep the C sharp, and now add a G sharp. This continues until every note has a sharp on it. We go up to the dominant, we reproduce the exact same scale, and we add in one more sharp. And where do we add that one more sharp? Well, we add it on scale degree 7. We add it in on T. Why do we add the most recent sharp on T? Well, you already know the last sharp is T. So in any key signature, as we've seen, we build the scale up and we add the sharps in order, and there, poof, that's how we get the T each time, by going one more. The same is true when we compose a scale using flats, except we're not going to go up to the dominant, we're going to go down to the subdominant, or down to scale degree 4, the Fa of the major scale. If we start on C again, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. That produces my whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half pattern. And instead of going up to the dominant at G, I'm now going to go down to the subdominant of F. And I wrote it up an octave just because otherwise we'd have a lot of ledger lines here. So that's our subdominant, or Fa, F. And if I think, now I'm going to produce the same pattern, well, in order to get whole, whole, half, in order to produce a half step there, I have to put a B flat. And then whole, 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 half. The rest of it is already done. So that is scaled, my F major scale. And it had one flat. And you might already notice that that one flat is on what solfege syllable? Well, it's on Fa, because the last flat is Fa. Well, what if I go to my subdominant again? What if I go to the Fa of this scale, the note I just put a flat on? Well, that's B flat. So here's my B flat, and I have to add one more flat in order to produce my whole step and half step pattern that the major scale requires. Whole, whole, I need a half step here. E flat, whole, 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 and then half. Well, what have I just done? I've added a flat on Fa, because my last flat is Fa. And now this key is B flat major. It centers around the note B flat. If I continue that even more, and I go to the Fa, the scale degree 4, the subdominant of this key, well, that note is E flat. And I can produce the entire same pattern, starting now on E flat. And in order to do that, I would need to put a flat here, my E flat that I just added, as well as my E flat that I just started on, as well as my B flat from before, and now adding in an A flat. I flatted the scale degree 4. Again, I flatted the Fa. So this is now the scale of E flat major. So you can go through this same idea where we're adding in one flat each time. In sharp keys, what did we say? The last sharp is T. And in flat keys, the last flat is Fa. And so by reading the key signature, we can determine the key that way. And by looking at building keys in order, we can determine which one goes last and in which order do we keep adding them. Keep adding a new flat, keep getting a new key. And they occur in a very specific order, which we'll go through in the next video. As you're going through this concept is called the circle of fifths, and you can refer to the diagram attached to this lesson. The circle of fifths is the idea that if we keep going a fifth, either a fifth up for sharps or a fifth down for flats, if we keep going in fifths, we'll eventually work an entire circle around every single key and end up back where we started. You can try it on the piano one time. Start at C and keep going on a fifth up, and eventually you'll get back to C. It'll take you a while, and you have to run out of notes on the piano and restart. And starting with flats, it'll work the same way. You keep going down, and eventually you'll restart, and you'll land on where you started. So the idea of the circle of fifths is a concept and a visual representation of how you can understand that music creates this pattern that is cyclical and then eventually arrives exactly where it started from.